Today, Nikon's Z52. I'm going to talk about who this camera is for, who should be considering it. We'll look at some images from it. I'll talk about using it. I'll tell you why I think it's an awesome little powerhouse for the right kind of photographer. And I'll showcase some accessories that I really think you should consider having with it. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. We're going to talk quite a fair bit about the Z52. We're going to look at its image quality. We'll look at some example images. I can just, spoiler alert, tell you that I've been having a lot of fun with this little camera, and I'm generally just astounded by what Nikon has included in it, the capabilities that it has, and how they mirror really the bigger full-frame cameras like the Z8 and the Z9. In, granted, no in-body image stabilization, that original sensor from the Nikon D500, the 20 megapixel APS-C sensor, although it seems to be optimized and even better in low light than I can remember it being in the past. And it certainly has all the autofocus tracking, amazing subject detection and capabilities that we would expect in a much more expensive camera, along with a great viewfinder, a wonderful back LCD, physical buttons, programmable buttons, hybrid autofocus, tons and tons of cool stuff. We'll talk about who this camera is for a little bit. I also want to put out just a few news bits, some concerning this camera. I did a full setup guide, a complete menu walkthrough for this camera. I think it's less for the person who wants to buy this and just put it in auto mode and point and shoot. It's more for someone who wants to kind of take their photography to the next level and really understand all the advanced capabilities of this camera. It's long. It's broken into two videos. The first one is quite long, where we go through all the menus and I show you how I set up my Z52 before going out and working with it. And then the second video talks about how to set up two of the available 3 user modes. One, to tweak all of the settings and customizations of button controls to be a really advanced action sports wildlife mode. So you can just flip into that and be ready to shoot birds in flight or auto racing or air shows or anything, your kid's soccer game or an NFL football game, whatever it happens to be that you want to photograph that's moving quickly, alongside a mode for landscape. And those videos, you can see the first video right here. That's the main setup video, the big long one. That would sort of be the prerequisite for a newcomer to understand all the settings and how they're set up. And then the second one, to customize those 2 user modes and take that basic set of settings, tweak them and save them into the user modes, is right here. You can also go into this video's full description and see links to everything I'm talking about, all the gear and accessories, those videos that I'm describing, as well as a link to download my saved settings from this very camera that you could upload into your camera if you desire. Now, I really recommend that you at least quickly watch my setup guide. You can watch it at 1.5 speed if you're an accomplished Nikon shooter. You can jump around, you can search through it. That whole video is all chaptered out, table of contents, just like this one. If you scroll along the bottom of the line, you can get to the part of the video that you want to watch more. But I'm offering that full setup file that you can just load into your camera and have the settings identical to mine if you want to download it. You can go right here to go get that, or again, click in this video's full description. And again, links to everything I'm talking about and all the accessories, the camera itself are over at my site. You can go to hudsonhenry.com/ATS links, and that link's right here. Those links help me out, and I really appreciate your considering using them. All right. So with all that kind of out of the way, I really like this little camera. I liked the Z50 when it came out, and I have taken the Z50 places like skiing and backpacking trips and out in my canoe with the kids, places I don't want to carry a big expensive camera system. And I have recommended the Z50 to countless people with, a niece that's graduating from high school and loves photography and wants to use more than a phone, or someone who's on a real budget and, they come asking me about Nikon Z5. My comment is always, go for the Z50, because you can get so much more in lenses for so much less money to work with that smaller sensor size. Your money goes so much further with a smaller sensor. And you know, a lot of people poo-pooed the Z50 because it felt so small and so lightweight, but it was quite a powerful little camera. This version of it keeps the sensor and takes that power to a whole nother level with the same X-Speed 7 processor that you get in the Z8, the Z9, the Z6 III, the ZF. It gives you all of those automated subject detection modes when you're using autofocus continuous tracking for wildlife and sports and action and people, birds, you name it. It has bird detect autofocus, people, animal, vehicles, airplanes. It really is stellar. It comes with a new battery that's got a little bit more milliampere, lasts a little bit longer than the original Z50's battery. You can use the original Z50's batteries, Z30, ZFC batteries in this camera. I noticed they last a little bit less than they do in those original Z cameras, but they're usable. You know, they'll get you by in a pinch. We'll talk about in accessories why I think you're better off with a power delivery capable battery brick than a bunch of extra batteries for this camera, since it has PD capable charging. You can use the camera while it's charging. Say you're doing work on a tripod, you can just plug it in, or you're out at lunch, you plug it in, top off the battery. I find myself almost never changing batteries now in the age of PD charging. You can plug it in at night. The lenses that you can get for this camera are just incredible. The bargain that this camera is for people that are on a bit of a budget or want something small and light and inexpensive, quite incredible. And it gives you just an incredible amount of power, from its intervalometer to its bracketing modes to its pre-release capture settings. You can even set this up to capture up to 30 frames a second full resolution JPEGs, and set it up so that if you half hold the shutter down watching a scene, it's actually recording 30 frames a second onto the card and then writing over the top of that and writing over the top of that. And when you actually press the button, it'll back up and save the 30 frames before you press the button. So for those scenes, you know, there was a situation in Costa Rica on my workshop where we were trying to capture this macro snake, this really small snake that kept sticking its tongue out, and trying to capture the tongue. It was so hard to anticipate when its tongue was actually going to come out. And using pre-release capture, you could just hit the button after its tongue came out and capture all the frames where the tongue was coming out before you hit the button. You know, those kinds of things. The baseball hitting the bat, you make sure you nail it. That stuff's available in this camera. Hybrid autofocus modes, where you're working with something like wide area autofocus with subject detection. It picks up your subject in the wide area because that's easier to get on your subject than a smaller 3D point. And then you hit a function button and it hands that wide area focused point off to a 3D point that tracks frame wide. Same kind of things you get in the much more advanced and expensive full frame cameras. And the ability to get glass, like I find this Viltrox 75mm 1.2 really wide aperture lens that's built for APS-C for the Z mount. You know, it's a DX lens. This is a $500 lens. It's not a cheap lens, but in comparison to a 1.2 long lens for full frame, you're going to pay multiple thousands of dollars for a lens like that. You know, you can pick up amazing primes like this little Viltrox 35mm 1.7 that released the day before this video is coming out. This video is out on Thursday. It came out on Wednesday. This is a 35 1.7, which with the 1.5 crop factor of the smaller sensor makes it much more like a 50 1.7. And it is unbelievably razor sharp and beautiful to shoot with. It's $170, and actually until the end of the month of December when it's come out, it's 15% off of that, so it's more like just, you know, 150 some dollars. The lenses are quite affordable. The fact that you can buy the 16 to 50 alongside the 50 to 250 kit lenses for this camera, both of which have in-body image both of which have vibration reduction technology, so it gives you image stabilization when you're shooting with the two kit lenses. What does that cost again? I think it's $1,300 for the camera body and both lenses. That's correct, $1,300. The body's $900, but you can get it with these two lenses for $1,300, and they give you the full frame equivalent field of view of 24mm to 375mm. And you know, I'm going to go through and show you some images captured with some of these little prime lenses and these kit lenses that, you know, showcase you can do an awful lot with this camera. And I really do think it's the perfect camera for somebody on a budget or just getting started in photography, or for some Nikon photographers. We'll talk about which Nikon photographers that currently own gear this might be a nice backup camera for after we run over and look at a few images on my Mac. All right, so first images out of the Z52. And I'm gonna just go ahead, jump in here. I got a little collection of sort of the first week of shooting with this camera. Somehow, first shots always seem to be of my cat, Grayson. He's the most willing model in the house usually when I'm down to just shoot something. And you're gonna see a combination of different lenses, some primes alongside the kit lenses for this camera. And you can see exposure, information, focal length, what lens it is, right up here on the left for every one of these frames. And I've done no noise reduction, no sharpening, no super resolution, anything like that. So what you're seeing is image quality from the camera. In a couple of cases, I might have cropped a tiny bit or pulled a shadow slider. But basically, this is the neutral profile straight out of the Z52. So you get a good view of image quality. You know, 1600 ISO, there's not much noise to speak of in this well-exposed image of gray. I was in auto subject detection mode using 3D, and I put the 3D tracker on his eye and boom, locked, stuck with it. Pretty darn cool. I was like, woo, this is great. And the thing that's really stuck with me is no matter what lens I'm using on this, whatever autofocus lens I'm using with it, the subject detection modes are killing it. You know, if you use the auto subject detection, it's pretty good at picking. It'll prioritize people, then animals, then vehicles and on. But if you choose people, it's going to look for eyes, it's going to lock eyes, it's going to track eyes. It's much more Z8, Z9-like than the original Z cameras, and certainly light years ahead of the original Z50. Image quality is still wonderful. It's that venerable D500 sensor that we all love. This is the Viltrox 75 1.2, as was the previous image. This is a little bit more expensive lens for the DX users. I think of it as the poor man's Plena. It's a 1.2 aperture, 75 millimeter, which on, you know, with the 1.5 crop factor takes you up to more like a 120, something 115, something like that. It's a wonderful portrait lens, and the way it does subject background separation is fabulous. And the fact that you can get it for a small fraction of the price of a full frame portrait lens anywhere close, it's pretty incredible. We're talking 1.2 here. Does a good job with, you know, the background lights here. You do get those kind of football shapes as you get towards the edges, rounder in the middle. Pike and pepper at this little tree lighting ceremony in Lake Oswego, a town close to Portland, nearby us. Our little friend Stella, who lives in our neighborhood and is our friend's daughter. She's just got an awesome smile, doesn't she? And you look at that, nailing focus. And that is a sharp lens on a good camera. We're at 1100 ISO, no noise to speak of. Here's Pike and Pepper downtown. They were doing this kind of, Pike just cracks me up in this scene. I mean, how 19-year-old doesn't give a care is this 9-year-old looking right now. I'm like, smile, Pike. All right, a little bit of a give to dad. But this is this Viltrox 35 1.7. I'll talk about this lens a little bit, and because it has blown me away. This is a brand newly released, very lightweight, very affordable prime for the Nikon Z-mount DX lens that I just love the way it renders the world, and it is sharp. But the eye detect is just wonderful. You know, and you have all this, the power of alternating focus area modes and activating focus and hybrid focus that you would with the Z8 and the Z9 in a much more affordable package. Here we're back to that 75 1.2 I really love for portraits. This sort of shows you where we were. We're in this downtown scene where they're blowing fake snow up in the air in a little holiday fair. Pike and Pepper sitting, taking it all in. I mean, just sharp, right? Really cool. This is the 56 1.7, another one of those lightweight, really sharp, affordable Viltrox primes for DX. Opens up a whole world of exploring prime lenses for DX where they're costing you $150 or so, $170, and not weighing very much. I was checking out its tracking at 9 frames a second. I put a 3D point on Pike's eye and tracked him as he runs in to jump up with pepper, then pepper jumping off, and it just tracks really well. It sticks with action really, really well. It's light years ahead of the original generation of the X-Speed 6 Nikons. The X-Speed 7 is a whole nother game, and the Nikon Z8, Z9, Z6III, ZF, and now Z52. These are a new generation of autofocus tracking and subject detection. You know, it's a whole nother world. It leaves anything you did with a DSLR behind, and it's pretty fantastic. So tracking action's great. This is one I was just kind of shooting, you know, playing around with some of the new buildings, and I had that 35 1.7, that brand new Viltrox lens on the camera, and I shot this building wide open. I was just playing around, and in reviewing the images, I'm like, holy cow, that lens is sharp. For being less than 200 bucks, it's insane. And I thought, you know, this is a cool new building in downtown Portland. I thought, you know, let's see what I could do with this manual focus 10mm TT Artisan lens, super affordable, little tiny lightweight f2 10mm DX lens. It didn't do too bad. It doesn't transmit any information. You have to manually focus it. I remember I focused the building, or actually I think I focused pepper and then dialed out to f11 and shot it and reviewed it, and I was like, well, not too bad. I mean, you are working with 10mm to try to get a scene that's equivalent to 15mm on full frame. It's a whole different world. That's a large order of magnitude difference, and you get a lot more distortion and a lot more, you know, ultra wide angle, near fisheye effect shooting with a 10mm. You get affected with the smaller sensor doing wide angle work, but you can still do cool stuff. So. And then taking it out, you know, looking at the other end of the spectrum where that smaller sensor crops into a lens's projection and actually gives you more reach with longer lenses. This is all at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge near our house with Pike the other day, walking around with the 50 to 250mm kit lens. It's image stabilized, it's vibration reduction, so you get to be able to hand hold it much steadier than a lens without, since this camera doesn't have in-body image stabilization. And you can see this is shot at 10,000 ISO. There's a tiny bit of noise. I've done no noise reduction whatsoever. If you were to run this through denoise, it would look clean. You know, this is pretty darn incredible out of a small sensor like this. They've juiced it. It's wonderful. And I found that the bird eye detect was working fabulously. We didn't have a lot of birds in flight, but Pike spotted and shot this great blue heron up in a tree in the wildlife refuge, and it locked its eye. I had it in wide area with bird subject detection activated, and he locked in, zoomed in, nailed that bird. You know, shooting egrets, I find often egrets that the eye detection will look at sort of the body or for some place on the body, but this camera was locking the eye as long as the eye was plainly visible with its head turned to the side. Pretty awesome. This is another shot by Pike. Shows you how complicated the scene was, and yet the camera locked in and found focus on that bird. Now, when the bird turns its head, eye detect's going to jump down onto the feathers, and that's where you use some of the modes I talk about in my setup guide, where you just flip instantly into 3D, put your 3D box right over the bird's head, and then lock the 3D point, and it'll continue to track the head. The minute the bird turns again, boom, it's going to see the eye and lock in on the eye, as long as you have bird eye detect. The bird eye detect was wonderful, and it was fun to play around with it. I can't wait to use it more. I think I'm just going to take this camera down to Baja, where we have lots of birds in flight to play with. And I thought the 50 to 250 is such a versatile lens, you know. Here's 50mm of this bird, of this heron up in the tree, you know, zooming into 155, you know, looking at 102. It's really nice to have these different focal lengths come into portrait length at 250mm. The 50 to 250 gives you the equivalent of 75 to 375mm field of view if you were shooting in full frame. Pretty incredible. And the bird detect worked great. I was in auto area for these little tiny birds that were flitting through the bushes and not staying anywhere more than like a second. And it nailed this little guy in the bushes. And you know, if you're wanting portraits, it's not going to give you the same beautiful out of focus rendering as some of these fast primes for the DX that we've been talking about. But with that long lens, you get close to your subject, but in focus distance with a background that's a little bit further away, and it doesn't render a terrible background. Even at f6 zoomed in to 210 millimeters. You know, this lens moves from f4.5 to 6.3 as you move through its zoom lanes. That's its maximum aperture. But the fact that you're going out to 210 millimeters, f6, it still renders a pretty nice background back there. Speaking of beautiful backgrounds, you know, that's where these little tiny primes come in. And I took the kids downtown to the big Christmas tree in downtown Portland and shot with some of my favorite primes for DX. This is Nikon's own 24 1.7, a really affordable, lightweight little lens, and it has beautiful bokeh. Again, as they get less round as you move toward the edge of the frame, but nice and round in the middle of the frame, and sharp, and that eye detect works so well, it's just like cheating. Here's the 35 Voigtlander. You know, it does a relatively round circle in the middle, but you know, out towards the edges, they're a little misshapen, but I actually love it. I think they look great. You know, they're it's a beautiful rendering. If we back out, back in, coming in a little bit closer with that same lens, you can see what I mean about the central bokeh is more rounded, and down as you get closer into the edges, it gets more football shaped. But they're beautiful out of focus rendering. Interesting. It's got character. But speaking of character, it's hard to beat the Voigtlander, you know, old school styled new lenses for Nikon Z. This is a manual focus, more expensive in the $500 range, 23 millimeter f1.2 lens that I love. This is a lens I'll keep around with the Z52 because the Z52 has that manual focus subject detection, much like the Nikon ZF and the 6.3, where it'll see an eye and you can focus until the square around the eye becomes green. If you hit the OK button, it'll zoom to 100% and track the eye while you perfect focus, and then a half press of the shutter button takes you back to the full view to recompose and shoot. It's like cheating with manual focus lenses. And the 23 millimeters up close to a subject lets you get such a nice environmental portrait. You know, we got the old Pioneer Courthouse and the Christmas tree and the old Myron Frank building in the scene. And then you can move in and just blow the background to smithereens if you want, even though you're working at 23 millimeters. It's a really versatile, wonderful lens. Well worth thinking about investing in. And then again, that Nikon 24 millimeter just has beautiful out of focus rendering. You know, it may not be quite as sharp. We'll take a look at lenses in a little bit as the Viltrox 1.7s, but man, I love the way it renders a scene. And sometimes absolute sharpness is not the greatest measure. Sometimes it's the character of a lens, and I really love Nikon's 23 1.7 or 24 1.7. So I think all in all, you can see you can do some fine work with this little camera. This is in my first week with it, and I can't wait to see what my kids do playing around with this and taking this camera skiing instead of a big, huge rig, or mountain biking, places where I don't want to carry a lot of weight, backpacking trips. This is an awesome little tool. All right, so I promised we'd talk about, you know, who is this camera for aside from the budget photographer or the brand new young photographer wanting to get started, or somebody just deciding to get excited about photography after a long hiatus and doesn't want to spend a lot of money. I think this is a perfect camera for the Nikon photographer who owns a big Z9 and a bunch of full frame glass, but wants to travel light sometimes, wants to go off with the family on a trip to Europe and doesn't want to carry the whole kitchen sink kit. You know, that's more for their photo trips, you know, with Rick and I to Costa Rica or something. It's also a great camera to back up the shooter whose primary camera is the Z6 III or the Nikon ZF or one of the original full-frame Nikon Z cameras, because this camera is going to give you 20 megapixels DX crop, which means that if you have, say, a 100 to 400 millimeter lens for the full-frame camera, it would give you the equivalent field of view and reach at 20 megapixels of 150 millimeters to 600 millimeters. You multiply that 1.5 crop factor. APS-C cameras are wonderful for distant subjects with long glass. They give you more reach. If you were working with those 24 megapixel cameras that I mentioned, the Z6 III, the ZF, then when you go into DX mode with those cameras, because they're a 24 megapixel sensor, you get down to 10 pixels or 9 pixels are all you're going to get out of its sensor when it crops into the center for using a DX mode and giving you you get the view, you're able to frame and look at the subject big in the viewfinder, but you're getting a lot less megapixels. This camera will give you twice the megapixels you get in DX mode with your Z6 or Z7. It's not such a great backup camera for the Z9 or the Z8 because those are 46 megapixel sensors, and if you throw them into DX mode, you get about the same amount of megapixels that you get from this camera. Those cameras have this camera built in and more speed and more capability, and the shutterless shooting is quite incredible. So I don't think it's a great backup camera for those of you with the big expensive 46 megapixel Z8 and Z9. It is perfect though for the Z6, the 24 megapixel shooter as a backup camera that's great with long glass. You put your wide angle on the full frame camera, you put your long glass on the APS-C camera. All right, so I talked about looking into some accessories, and the first one I would say, I really think if you're buying this camera new and you don't have Nikon glass, the kit lenses are fantastic. They both do really well shooting into backlight. They're both nice and sharp. They're both light. They're great little lenses. I say anything new that Nikon's designed for the Z system is pretty shocking in its optical quality. That shorter flange distance from the mount to the sensor and the wider opening of that big Z mount, even on this small camera, really has made life wonderful for the optical engineers at Nikon, and they have taken full advantage of it. I think that a couple of accessories I would just recommend you get right off the bat are this little Viltrox 35 1.7 prime lens. Working with a fast prime lens, when you get out in low light, the one thing lacking with these kit lenses for the Z52 are, they're not very wide aperture. You get in low light situations and your ISO is going to ramp way up. And you just saw this camera does pretty well even at 10,000 ISO. But having a fast prime for working in darker conditions or at night or blurring backgrounds can be really, really satisfying. And you saw some of the images from this little 35 1.7, as well as their 56 1.7, these new Viltrox Air lenses. I feel like when Viltrox started making lenses for the Z system and they sent them to me, I thought, ooh, these are just soft and not all that usable. And then they sent me some more lenses and I had a look and I thought, wow, these are getting better. And then they sent me this 75 1.2 kind of premier lens for DX, and I was blown away by how beautiful it was. I felt, like I said, that it's a bit of the poor man's Plena. And then everything that they've produced since has really made me happy. And nothing that Viltrox has done yet has made me as happy as this 35 1.7 for the Z52 for APS-C. It is sharp, sharp, sharp. The color rendition's wonderful. Actually, take a look. I'm going to show you some examples of these lenses versus Nikon's own little 24 1.7. All right, so those of you who've seen me review lenses and look at sharpness before, you know I love my brick wall test. I always go to my kids' school. In this case, I went to the Pioneer Courthouse Square with my kids when I was photographing the tree, and they played around with their mom and had hot chocolate while I took pictures of a brick wall, and people looked at me like I was crazy. But what I do is I set up the tripod, I get level, I get square, I shoot the brick wall, focused very carefully at different apertures with each lens, and then we take a look at what the sharpness and the edges look like. And I thought I'd compare these Viltrox affordable little 1.7 primes to the Nikon 24 1.7 prime. So what we've got in the gray is the Nikon 24 1.7, in the yellow is the Viltrox 35 1.7, kind of equivalent to like a normal 50-ish millimeter lens. And then in the green is the Viltrox 56 1.7, which is much more like a 75 or 80 millimeter lens. About 80. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Nikon 24 and the Viltrox 35 and put them into compare view. And you can see the Nikkor is on the left and the Viltrox is on the right. Now, they're a little bit different focal lengths. You get more of the world. And we know that the Nikon has beautiful bokeh. The way that it renders out of focus highlights is wonderful. The Viltrox does a fine job. They're not quite as beautiful as the Nikon. But take a look at the Viltrox sharpness in the corners as compared to the Nikon wide open at 1.7. I mean, sort of shocking, right? And I was very careful to focus both of these cameras. I'm just going to open up our lower panel here. We'll flip, and what we'll do is we'll have a look instead at, that was a wide open at 1.7. Let's look at f2.8. All right, and we got the Viltrox on the right and the Nikon on the left. If we look at the center, both are nice and sharp, but when we get out to the edges, the Viltrox is still thumping the Nikon. We go to f5.6. I find with a lot of these new mirrorless short flange distance lenses, 5.6 is sort of a primo aperture. You can see, you know, it's getting cleaner out. It's getting a little bit closer at this stage. Both are beautifully sharp in the middle. If we go to f11, you know, I like to look at that. Is it causing diffraction for storytelling images? Oh, and we flipped images here. What about this last one? Let me have a look at that. Let's just make sure we're looking at which is which. All right, yeah, so the Viltrox is now on the left and the Nikon is now on the right. And the Viltrox looks a little sharper at f5.6 too, and it is certainly still razor sharp frame wide. It just doesn't seem like the Viltrox breaks down from wide open on. I mean, it's got incredible edge sharpness. And then f11, like I said, I like to see if f11 is still sharp frame wide for getting those landscape scenes with everything in focus. And now we're back to Viltrox on the right. I apologize for that. Nikon on the left. It's kind of obvious too by the Viltrox being the larger bricks, but the Viltrox is still thumping the Nikon out at the edges. They're both sharp in the center, right? And then let's just have a look really quick. We don't need to be in compare view anymore. We can just go in and have a look at the 56mm Viltrox. If we come out of this, this is the fit view. There's the whole wall at 56mm. I didn't move the tripod whatsoever, so you're just getting a relative view of what 56 and DX looks like as compared to 35, as compared to 24. But let's look at the 56, and you can see it's pretty darn sharp to the edges at wide open at f1.7. You go to f2.8, it's really sharp frame wide. You go to 5.6, really, really sharp. f11, these Viltrox Air 1.7 primes, they may be light, they may be small, they may be cheap, but they are pretty powerful little dudes. All right, so when it comes to buying a few prime lenses to go with your Z52, I mean, I think you can't beat the 35 1.7, and because they just released it, they have a special price. I've got a link in this video's full description, or like I said, you can go over to my website, to my links page on my website. But it's normally about $180. I'm rounding everything up. And they have a 15% off deal through the end of December. I think it's at least through December 30th, where it'd be $152. That's just crazy cheap for such a nice, fast prime. I really do like Nikon's 24 1.7. It's not quite as sharp as the Viltrox 1.7s, but it's tiny, it's light. It costs $226. It costs a little bit more. Has beautiful out of focus rendering though. A lot of character in this lens. The bokeh is just gorgeous. It's a great little wide angle. It winds up being about a 35mm equivalent when you put it on the DX sensor. It's a great little DX lens. I've been blown away by it. And I like how it's got, its little hood has filter threads too, so you can use either the filter thread size for the hood or the little tiny 46 filter thread on the front. I think the Viltrox 56 1.7 at $150 is another really great lens. That winds up being sort of a 80mm equivalent, nice for portraits and tighter scenes, kind of fun out on the street too. I think when you get the camera, you really owe it to yourself to get the small rig base plate for it. It comes with an integrated tool that magnets into place, and it's a standard screw lock opener. It lets you access the battery and memory card quite easily. And you know what it does? A couple of different things. It's got the Arca Swiss plate on the bottom to just lock into whatever tripod you're using. Not an L bracket, but an Arca Swiss plate. And it adds just a little room for a larger hand like mine on the grip. The Z52's grip is better than the original Z50, but it's still a little bit small for big hands, but when you put this small rig base plate on there, it extends that a little bit and it just feels great in my hand. All four of my fingers fit on there comfortable with just a little room below. I think it's a great, great, great addition. If you're really longing for an L bracket for this camera, I don't know of one yet. I'm advocating some people make it. But another option that Small Rig also makes, this little base plate is $30. But they also make this cage, which is generally more for video shooters, but the cage fits really nicely on here, and it threads in and locks into place. And then what I do is just add an Arca Swiss plate to the side mounts. They have all these nice little threaded side mount ports. You thread this guy on here, and then if you put an Arca Swiss plate out, one of the nice things about that is those front plates are set out so that you can still get to your ports for video, and you can mount the camera and still get access to your swing screen. I've done that with the ZF as well. I like the cage with the Arca Swiss plate mounted a little bit out. Now I've got the no longer available Luma Labs titanium Arca plate, but there are plenty of small Arca plates you could just screw right into the side of the small rig cage that'll work great. And it's comfortable to hold with this cage too. It's such a small camera, the cage doesn't have that much. So if you're going out for landscape work and you know you're going to be working on a tripod, you can just throw this cage in the bag. My favorite, of course, is the little base plate. That just works so well for it. I think, you know, if you've got some batteries for earlier Nikon APS-C cameras, they will work with it. Again, you can't use the new battery. The new battery is gray, by the way. Both of these plates, the L bracket or the base plate and the cage, have a little lever that flips out that lets you get to the battery and the memory card. The new battery is gray. It's got more milliamps in it, it lasts a little bit longer, and it definitely is better at powering the Z52, which is a little more power hungry. So it's nice they made it gray to differentiate. Typical with Nikon, they don't have a whole bunch of these available right now off the bat, but I wouldn't buy the original Z50 or Z30 or ZFC batteries to go in this camera. Like I said, these black original ones, they drain pretty quick in the Z52. Instead, I would get the tried and true Anker 20,000 milliamp power delivery capable battery bank. Comes with a nice charging cord and a case. This will charge the camera multiple times very quickly. You just plug the USB-C cord into its power delivery USB-C port. You pop open the power delivery USB-C port on the camera, and while you're having lunch, you top your battery off. Or when you throw the camera in your bag and you're moving between places you're shooting, you top the battery off. Or while it's sitting on the seat of the car, you top the battery off. I almost never switch batteries in my ZF, in my Z9, in my Z52, in any of my Nikons anymore because they're power delivery capable, and I just keep this little $30 battery bank with me. I've got a link to this in the video's full description or over on my website with the camera. If you're working on a tripod with this camera, I love the fact that they came out with a wired, simple remote control. Press the button. You can also press the button and slide it like old school style to lock it if you're in bulb mode. And it just plugs into the headphone jack of the camera, and it works great. I didn't really love the Bluetooth connection remote for the Nikon ZF, and I was hopeful that this remote would also work with the Nikon ZF. Sadly, no. But I love that it works with the Z52. So you can get this MCDC3 remote. I think that little remote is like $37, well worth it. The power delivery brick is $28. I don't know what batteries are gonna cost. I don't even see them available at this point. And that leaves a few, one other point I'll make that I love that Small Rig did for both the base plate and the cage is they made them QD compatible. So for those of you lucky enough to have good quality QD straps, the fact that you can just plug the QD in and out of the base plate and the cage makes for easy sling carrying. That's really, really nice. All right, and then I have a few more obscure accessories that someone might consider. I will just say to you quickly, if you were to buy the cage, the base plate, the camera with its 2-lens kit, the 35 1.7, the 56 1.7, the Nikon 24 1.7, and everything, the remote control cable, and the battery bank that we talked about, you'd spend less than $2,000. That's a pretty sweet deal for a camera of this capability. I mean, I think that's where this thing shines, is in both its small size and its affordability. And you know, it still has great image quality. I know some people will knock the 20 megapixel sensor, but for years and years, the best pros in the world worked with the 20 megapixel Nikon D5. You know, we had 20 megapixels when we shoot in DX mode from the Z9 and the Z8 doing wildlife at a distance. 20 megapixels can go with a nice, sharp, well-captured image, well-exposed image, to 80 megapixels in a flash with Lightroom Classic's super resolution in the enhanced panel. You just click on super resolution, 20 megapixels becomes 80 megapixels, and it'll keep its sharpness and clarity and color rendition. So, all right, so let's talk about another more expensive set of accessories, or just obscure. This one's an interesting little oddity that I play around with. When all I'm taking is APS-C, like the Z52, this little TT Artisan 10mm f2 manual focus, no electronic contacts, no exposure information passes through this lens. It's pure old school, manual aperture, control ring. It's got a little depth of field gauge on it, which is kind of nice, and then a zone focusing gauge on it. It's a small, light, little Z-mount 10mm lens that lets you do, albeit a bit distorted and 10mm-ish, ultra-wide angle work with an APS-C sensor. I showed you an image in the image reviews of that building and sky with the kids in the foreground. This thing is not horrifically expensive. It's $170. It's light. Well, it's not that light. It's a nice little chunk of metal, but it's small and it's kind of fun. It also comes with a filter adapter hood that goes to 77. I put a 77 to 82mm adapter on it to use case filters. It threads right onto it. Another lens that I love, I showed you some images from, is this Voigtlander 23mm 1.2 manual focus, beautifully crafted, spectacular Japanese lens by Cosina. Cosina owns the Voigtlander name, and I love this lens. This lens has so much character. It's about $500. I think it's on sale. It used to be about $700. And I bought it again the minute that I saw the Z52 was coming out and that it had the manual focus subject detection. Manual focus subject detection is a cool thing that Nikon should bring to all of their older cameras, certainly their XPEED 7 processed cameras, whereby you can tell it that in manual focus mode you'd like it to do subject detection in either wide area or auto area, and it will detect eyes in the frame and draw a box, and then you can focus and the box will become green when they're in focus, and if you hit the OK button with it programmed to zoom to 100%, it zooms on the eye and tracks it while you perfect focus. Half press of the shutter button takes you back and you can shoot. It's like cheating with a manual focus lens. Forget about focus peaking. Automatic subject detection with manual focus is just a dream come true. I love it. And this lens I love having for the little Z52. And of course, as I talked about, this much larger but built for APS-C 75 1.2 from Viltrox is an astounding lens. The poor man's plena, as I like to say. It is an astounding 75mm 1.2 aperture, a light gathering, beautiful portrait lens. So if you were to, all this stuff is less than $2,000. All this stuff is about $1,200 or $1,170 if you put it together. So those are some fun accessories. I have linked with the camera over on my ATS links page. All these stuff is linked here in this video's full description. I think if you have this camera, you're going to fall in love with it. It is a cool little machine. Do I hope that someday they come out with an APS-C sensor in the 30 megapixel range, sort of following Fuji with the X100 VI? Sure, it'd be great, right? But will they? I kind of doubt it. I think they're pointing the APS-C market in Nikon towards the budget buyer or the new photographer or the casual user, somebody who's cost conscious. And they've done that by keeping the 20 megapixel sensor, juicing it, adding all the power that they've got in the XPEED 7 processor for the bigger cameras, and leaving out the in-body image stabilization. If they come out with a DX camera with in-body image stabilization and higher megapixels with some new, stacked sensor, it would be amazing, and I'll be happy to play with it. But for right now, this is the one I'm gonna take out with the family and on backpacking trips and ski trips and when I need to go light. it's pretty darn awesome. So again, I've got setup videos that go menu wide through this camera. You can hit those in the full description to this, as well as a full downloadable set of settings from my camera to yours if you should so desire it. All right, everybody, that's it for this one. You have any questions or comments, you hit me up. I hope everyone is enjoying this holiday season. I know I'm just loving more time with family and good food. That's what it is all about. I hope all of you are too. And I hope you're out there staying safe and staying creative. Oh, one more quick announcement. We're having an office hours. I think it's January 7th. It's a Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific. And we're going to be looking through your best images of 2024. So you can submit those. You can run over to hudsonhenry.com/office hours. And when you go over there, you'll see a submission form and all the details. Please read the instructions carefully. You need to name the files correctly and size them correctly. But we'll go through those images at that office hours in early January. You can sign up for it on Zoom or YouTube Live, big free meetup get together. And we'll pick out some of our favorites and give out some cool prizes to those that we feel are extra deserving. All right, so I hope to see you there at those office hours. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying creative. If you've got a new Z52, I hope you're having a ton of fun with it and bugging everybody in the family, taking pictures of them and the winter scenery outside. Enjoy all that good food, and we'll see you next week.